All right, so Israel has officially resumed their bombing and invasion of the Gaza Strip. So this is something that was kind of inevitable based on the statements that we got from Israeli politicians and defense officials over the roughly like 7 days that this easing of bombing in Gaza lasted. And they warned that when they resume bombing, it's going to be as intense or more intense than it was even before, which is saying a lot because they essentially obliterated the entirety of the northern portion of the Gaza Strip. And now it looks like they're going to be significantly escalating in the south of Gaza, as pointed out here by Ryan Grimm, where they were dropping leaflets in some of these towns and cities inside of the south. And, I mean, obviously, they warned people in the north to flee to the south and said that the south would be safe. They continuously were bombing inside of the south. Most of it was concentrated in the north. They were always bombing in the south. But this is where they told people to flee to. And so they keep updating, okay, we want everybody, 2.2 million people in what was already before this bombing campaign, one of the most densely populated places on the face of the planet. They keep shoving them into smaller and smaller regions within Gaza and saying, okay, now this place isn't safe, this zone isn't safe, etc., etc. And the reality at the end of the day is what we've known from the beginning, which is that nowhere is safe. There is no like humanitarian zone where you're entirely going to escape the Israeli bombardment. It just doesn't exist in Gaza. They are targeting everything and everyone and everywhere inside of this region. So Ryan Grimm points out here, he's confirmed that he's been sent 2 of these different flyers. The rough translation is to the residents of Al-Qarara and Kerbet al-Kazuza, Absan, and Benai Suhaila, sorry for butchering those names, but you must evacuate immediately and head to these shelters in the Rafah area, which is kind of where the Rafah crossing is with Egypt, like on the very edge of Gaza in the south. The city of Khan Yunis is a dangerous combat zone. You have been warned. So this area of Khan Yunis, this is where Israel is now claiming the Hamas headquarters are, or where a significant Hamas base of operations is. And, obviously this comes literally just days after they were claiming that the Al-Shifa hospital was this major Hamas command center, and then proceeded to show absolutely no evidence that it was, other than like a couple of AK-47s laid out on the ground and, some empty tunnels that they did video tours through. So, I mean, they just keep shifting shit around. They're never consistent with any of the claims or the evidence. And again, the reality of this is that they're just bombing the entirety of the Gaza Strip in an effort to try to, punish the Palestinian people for what happened on October 7th during that Hamas attack into southern Israel. We also had this here from the New York Times. Blinkin recently went over to talk to their defense officials and to talk to Bibi and all of that. And so he says that he's urging Israel to take concrete steps to aid civilians as more hostages are freed. So let's read a little bit of this, right? This is the Biden administration essentially pretending like they care about the humanitarian catastrophe that's currently happening on the ground, and pretending as if, they're pushing Israel to ease up on the civilian slaughter and massacre, right? Mr. Blinken said that he had made clear to the Israeli leaders the imperative of a clear plan in place that puts a premium on protecting civilians. What does that mean? Puts a premium on protecting civilians? They've already killed at least over 15,000 civilians. Okay, we passed recently the 7,000 dead children mark. We know that verifiably the overwhelming majority of the people who are being killed are civilians. In fact, the majority are women and children, okay? So the idea that we need to put a premium on protecting civilians, the issue here isn't that they're not doing enough to aid civilians or to protect civilians. The issue here is that they are intentionally, indiscriminately bombing civilians on purpose. That's the problem here, right? The problem is that they are wantonly committing war crimes, not that there's like a oopsie daisy and now there's some unavoidable humanitarian situation where civilians need your help more. No, they're doing this, and they're doing this on purpose. Okay, and they say they need to put that premium on the civilians before any military operation begins in southern Gaza. The Israeli government agreed with that approach, he said at a news conference in Tel Aviv, without citing any specific Israeli commitments. So you're going over there, you're basically doing like the mildest finger wagging at them that you possibly can. You're not getting any specific commitments to anything from them, and then just saying, oh, well, they agreed with that approach, kind of, sort of, and, surprise, surprise, as we're going to get to here in a minute. I'm going to show you some of the videos of what this recent escalation of the bombing looks like. They are, in fact, not protecting civilians, right? They've been continuing to target civilians indiscriminately. But they say, with the pause in the fighting set to expire in a matter of hours, Mr. Blinken said that the U.S. did not oppose a resumption of Israel's offensive despite international pressure for a long-term ceasefire, saying that Israel had a right to protect itself after Hamas's October 7th cross-border attack. So, I mean, listen, again, is this Israel protecting itself when you're bombing mosques and churches and schools and UN shelters, okay, and refugee camps and hospitals? Is that protecting yourself? Is that self-defense? Or is that a war crime? I mean, they have no consistent standards, right? I mean, I showed you guys all of the different videos of these same exact Biden White House administration officials when they're talking about Vladimir Putin and when they're talking about what he has done in Ukraine. And you can put a force multiplier of like a factor of like 10 or 100 in terms of what Israel has done in Gaza. It is incomparable to what Putin has done in Ukraine, which is saying a lot. And yet, when we're talking about our ally Israel, then they have none of the same criticisms that they had for Russia, right? But I mean, again, talking about this as if this is a response of self-defense to Hamas's October 7th attack, when we know that you're killing an overwhelming majority innocent men, women, and children, that's not self-defense. That's just a massacre. They continue, quote, Israel has the right to do everything that it can to ensure that the slaughter that Hamas carried out on October 7th can never be repeated, he said on Thursday evening after meeting with Israeli leaders, saying Hamas cannot remain in control of Gaza. It cannot retain the capacity to repeat that carnage. So there still isn't any plan whatsoever that the Israelis have put forward that is even mildly feasible, okay, outside of just like completely ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip, for what would happen if Hamas was removed from power. Who's going to replace them? Israel doesn't want the Palestinian Authority to operate inside of Gaza. The Palestinians in Gaza probably don't want the Palestinian Authority anyways because they're viewed largely as collaborators with Israel, which I think is an accurate classification of them. So what is the actual plan there in the long run? There is no plan, okay? And then what is the plan for getting Hamas, right? What is the plan for actually eradicating Hamas as Israel says that it wants to do? I mean, think about statistics like this, as pointed out here by Adam Johnson. At the current rate of civilian deaths relative to how many Hamas members they've killed, and this is based on Israel's own numbers, eliminating Hamas will require killing over 300,000 civilians in Gaza, right? Because if you kill 18,000 civilians to get 1,000 Hamas fighters, then you just do a little simple math equation there. In order to kill 30 to 40,000 Hamas fighters, you're going to need to kill hundreds and hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza, okay? Is that what we're planning for right now? Is that what the U.S. is going to support? That what Israel is going to do? And then beyond that, as he also points out here, the survivors of this slaughter that's happening right now in Gaza, this genocidal campaign, how do you know that they're not just going to turn around and honestly deservingly hate Israel for their actions, for killing their family members, their friends, their loved ones, for destroying their homes, for making the entirety of where they lived unlivable? How do you know that that's not just going to turn into some sort of manifested Hamas 2.0, or that they're not just going to recruit more people into Hamas because of your actions? I mean, all of this is just nonsensical. And he says that this isn't my opinion. It's actually the opinion of the former head of Shin Bet, an intelligence agency in Israel, who casually said this a few weeks ago. So here you have it. Yaakov Perry, a former head of Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Security Service, said that the military and intelligence agencies would kill the Hamas commanders who carried out the October 7th attacks. But, like General Brown, he worries that Israel is creating a new generation of fighters, saying, quote, "We'll be fighting their sons in 4 or 5 years." So is what Israel's doing right now actually a long-term strategic plan for, creating peace and stability in this area, for even protecting Israeli citizens? No, it's not. This is just a revenge tour for what happened on October 7th. They are trying to collectively punish, which is a crime against humanity, a war crime, the entirety of the Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, for what happened on October 7th. None of this has to do with Israeli security. Okay, if anything, these actions in the long run are going to make Israel and the Israeli citizens less secure. Okay, so it's carnage for the sake of carnage. Now they continue here. They say, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated on Thursday that the aim of Israel's military campaign was to crush Hamas. It is a goal that Israel as well as U.S. officials say remains far from complete. Think about this. They have already destroyed a majority of the standing structures in the northern portion of Gaza. A majority of all of the buildings in the north of Gaza, where over 1 million people were living, have been completely destroyed, and they're turning around and saying the goal of defeating Hamas, we're nowhere even remotely close to that. So think about what the implication of that is for the level of destruction that is to come. even as the number of people killed in Gaza, most of them women and children, has soared past 13,000, and it's much higher than that. They say Mr. Blinken suggested that his phone call, or that his call for protecting Palestinian civilians had reached receptive ears, at least in general terms. What the fuck does that even mean? He also said that Israel should allow civilians who fled from northern Gaza in the first weeks of the war to return home, adding that there must be no enduring internal displacement. Okay, so basically what you have here, and I'll link this whole article down below in the description. Basically what you have here is Blinken and Biden, again, in the mildest way. I don't even know if you could call it finger wagging at Israel, because they're really not. They're saying, we agree with what you're doing. We're okay with you continuing with this mass slaughter of Palestinians. That's totally fine. The only real critique that I've seen is like, well, you're going to have less time than you may want. Israel is saying this is going to take months and months and months. It's at least going to go into 2024. Who knows what that actually means or how long it really will take. But basically, the biggest criticism or pushback I've seen is he's saying, like, you have weeks, okay? You have a couple of weeks, maybe a month or something to finish this operation. That's the biggest pushback that I've seen. And what is the reason for that? Well, we know based on other, statements from Anthony Blinken and guys like him in the Biden administration previously, we know that they don't actually care about the humanitarian situation on the ground. This is why they said you should push for a temporary pause in the fighting a couple of weeks ago, was because they told Israelis, if you do a humanitarian pause, whatever the fuck that means, it will help us to ease pressure on ourselves, domestically here in the United States and around the world for that matter, in order to help justify a longer bombing campaign. So, I mean, when he says you only have a couple of weeks to get this done, it's not because he thinks that what they're doing is wrong, okay? It's because they're feeling a lot of pressure on them right now, and they don't know how much longer they can justify these brazen war crimes that are being done with U.S. taxpayer dollars, with U.S. weapons. They don't know how much longer they can justify that publicly to the American people. So that's the only constraint, which is another reminder in terms of why it is important for everybody to continue, not allowing these motherfuckers in power here in the United States to go a single moment throughout their day in peace, right? Continue to, go to protests, continue to, do whatever you possibly can. Blast your members of Congress to call for a ceasefire. Call the phones. Ceasefire Today has all the resources that I've showed you guys, ceasefiretoday.com. So continue to do that because they're clearly feeling the pressure, at least in some sense. So now I want to show you what the some of the images on the ground actually look like. This was just an hour after the ceasefire had ended. And here you have people who, obviously are in some sort of a house or an apartment building that has just been completely destroyed. And they're carrying people out who have been either killed or seriously wounded in one of these airstrikes in, what looks like a rug here. Okay, so, I mean, this is just some of the carnage that is already taking place within just an hour of the ceasefire easing up. We also had absolutely horrific stories like this here from Human Rights Watch. This is literally just from today. Birth and death intertwined in Gaza Strip. Okay, so, warning, this is pretty fucking bleak, but on November 9th, Israeli airstrikes hit the Al Nasser Medical Center in Gaza City, cutting off the neonatal intensive care unit's oxygen supply. The attack forced staff to evacuate the next day, leaving babies that could not be transported alone in intensive care, according to Doctors Without Borders. On November 28th, during the ceasefire, doctors were able to return and found 5 babies dead. Okay, and I've seen videos of this. It's, some of the most horrific things you could possibly imagine seeing, where, these doctors were forced out by these attacks, and they obviously couldn't take these babies who were, on, intensive care, and they couldn't take them with them, and then they return, maybe holding out hope that, like, the Israelis would step in during this invasion, during this bombing campaign, and potentially help out some of the kids. No, they all died, right? So, I mean, it's shit like this that I don't know how people sleep at night. I don't know how people continue to justify this to themselves. They also say that Gaza authorities report more than 6,000 Palestinian kids have been killed in Gaza. Moving on, this was one of the most tragic stories that I've seen that has been posted on a mainstream news source. This was from CNN, shockingly, but it's a really good story here. It's extremely sad. I'm not going to play the entirety of it. We'll play about the first minute and a half of this. But this was a grandfather and a mother who lost their young family members in one of these airstrikes. And it's a rare situation here where, the mainstream media is actually putting a human face on the carnage that we are seeing right now in Gaza. So let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this.
Khalid and Reem were inseparable. Her grandfather was her whole world. Her favorite game, pulling his beard, and he would pull her pigtails. I'll let go, she says, if you let go. Khalid just can't let go of his little Reem. Now searching for memories amid the rubble of his home. This was Reem's doll, he says. The family was asleep when an airstrike nearby brought down their house in southern Gaza last week. Khalid woke up screaming for his children and grandchildren, struggling to walk in the dark and through the wreckage to find them. I couldn't find anyone. They were buried underneath all this rubble, he says. My daughter Mesa was here. Her children, Reem and Todd, were here in her arms. Mesa and her sister barely survived. After a few days in intensive care, they're now recovering at a relative's house. I felt something heavy on top of me. I started screaming, Mesa says. I heard Reem screaming next to me. I told her, there's something heavy on top of me. I can't reach you. I said my final prayers, and next, I woke up in the hospital. Mesa woke up to the news. Her 3- and 5-year-old children were gone. Their lifeless bodies found together under the rubble.
So it doesn't get much worse than that, man. And you can multiply this situation times thousands in terms of what we've seen in Gaza. Again, I've seen estimates everywhere from 6,000 to 8,000 to more than that, just in terms of the amount of children like these who are killed. And I mean, you saw the destruction of what his house looked like here. This was apparently from a bomb, an airstrike. This is how heavy the bombing is, or the bombs that they are using. This was from an airstrike that was next door. It wasn't even necessarily targeting this house, but it brought down the house and leveled this much destruction to the point where it killed those kids, right? And injured their mother. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that is happening countless times, every single day. We also had this story that dropped that is as dystopian as it gets. Here from The Guardian, the gospel, how Israel uses AI to select bombing targets in Gaza. They are using an AI program to decide where they're going to bomb. And this AI program has decided that, you know, they're going to take it up. It used to be, according to one of the Israeli officials in this article, it used to be like a couple of years ago, they would have like 50 targets that they could identify in Gaza, maybe even on like a yearly basis. And with this AI program that they're using now, which who knows how fucking accurate it is, obviously from what we're seeing on the ground, not accurate at all. But they ramped that up from about 50 a year to about 100 a day. 100 a day. Okay, so they say here, Israel's military has made no secret of the intensity of its bombardment of the Gaza Strip. In the early days of the offensive, the head of its Air Force spoke of the relentless around-the-clock airstrikes. His forces, he said, were only striking military targets, but he added, we are not being surgical. So, I don't know, man, kind of seems like a direct contradiction from what you just said. We're only striking military targets, but we're not being surgical. Well, which one is it? Because if you're just like generally dropping massive bombs or like carpet bombing in areas that you think may be military targets, but you're not really being careful about it, and you're in the meantime killing vastly disproportionately civilians instead of Hamas members or military sites, then you're not really striking military targets, right? I mean, it's just like, it's completely ridiculous. It's like when the United States dropped the nukes on Japan, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and part of the justification was like, okay, we're going to strike this tiny military base that exists in this city. And it's like, okay, if you drop that kind of a bomb on a military site that's in the middle of a city and you level the entire city in the process, you didn't really target a military site, did you? You just kind of slaughtered a bunch of civilians, right? It's the same exact logic here. There has, however, been relatively little attention paid to the methods used by the IDF to select targets in Gaza and the role that AI is playing in their bombing campaign. As Israel resumes its offensive after a 7-day ceasefire, there are mounting concerns about the IDF's targeting approach in the war against Hamas that, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, has so far killed more than 15,000 people. The IDF has long burnished its reputation for technical prowess and has previously made bold but unverifiable claims about the harnessing of new technology. And after the 11-day war in Gaza in May of 2021, officials said that Israel had fought its first AI war using machine learning and advanced computing. The latest war has provided an unprecedented opportunity for the IDF to use such tools in a much wider theater of operations and, in particular, to deploy an AI target creation platform that they're calling the Gospel. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. Which has significantly accelerated a lethal production line of targets that officials have compared to a factory. So they're using artificial intelligence that they call the Gospel to significantly escalate attacks on Gaza which are overwhelmingly killing civilians, and they're calling this like basically a factory of death, okay? So there you have it. That's the latest updates in terms of the bombing. Again, I would anticipate this is probably going to get significantly worse from here. We also had this update from Mustafa Barghouti. So far, Israel has released 240 Palestinian prisoners, but arrested 310 new prisoners, including women, during the same period. And I mean, keep in mind, a vast majority of the Palestinians who were being released as a part of this hostage deal that was happening over the last week or so, they were kids. And many of them were kids who had never been charged with anything officially. They put them in these bullshit like military courts where the conviction rate is like 99.9%. And they'll bring in some kid who was like holding a rock, okay? And they'll say you were inciting terrorism, right? Or sometimes they won't even tell them what they're being held for. They won't show them any evidence that is apparently against them, right? It's just the same exact thing as hostage taking. That's the only way to possibly characterize it. And so during this, I mean, imagine if Hamas was doing this. Imagine if, as Hamas was releasing some of the hostages that they did over the last week, they were also sneaking into Israel to take more hostages. What would the global community say about that? That's exactly what Israel has been doing. 310 new hostages, including women, during the same exact period. So, I mean, there you go. There's your, your updates, your tragic, horrific updates for today. Again, I kind of knew that this was inevitably going to happen, but seeing it happen and seeing the United States continue to refuse to use even any of the levers of power that we have in order to apply pressure on Israel to stop this, to see the United States unleashing our arsenal on the heads of Palestinian men, women, and children to the tune of thousands of people killed so far. It really is just like something else. Like, I've never witnessed anything like this in my entire life. Obviously we had the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, but you can even make comparisons. We're talking about like wars that took place over decades when we're talking about Iraq and Afghanistan. And you can do comparisons, right? I brought this up before, but there was a month of this bombing campaign inside Gaza where Israel dropped more bombs on Gaza than the U.S. did in the heaviest year of bombing in Afghanistan. So this is like, it's totally uncomparable in scale and in speed to any other modern war that we could possibly think of. I mean, you probably have to go back to like the Vietnam War to get a comparison to what is happening right here with the density of the carnage that we are currently witnessing. And of course, the United States is continuing to full-throatedly back this. I mean, they're, again, doing their bullshit finger-wagging behind the scenes about, oh, please don't kill as many children in Gaza. And Israel's like, yeah, okay, sure, buddy. Yeah, get the fuck out of my face. Keep giving us weapons. And the U.S. is like, okay, sure, we'll just continue doing that, right? So, I mean, there you have it. We'll have to keep on this over the next couple of days. Again, keep on the pressure in whatever way that you possibly can. I'm going to have a couple more videos out for you tomorrow on some other absolutely insane updates that we've gotten in regards to October 7th and some of the massive intelligence failures of Israel on October 7th and some of the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu. And, also, I mean, keep in mind, Benjamin Netanyahu is not popular in Israel. Okay, Benjamin Netanyahu does not speak for the Jewish people. He barely even speaks for the Israeli people right now. Okay, in a large part, I think he's doing this because this is the only thing that is keeping him in power. This is the only thing that is allowing him to, hold on to his seat right now and to possibly prevent him from, facing accountability for some of his corruption allegations and all the rest of that. So, I mean, it really is just such a disgusting and horrifying situation. But I'll keep on top of it because I think that, people need to keep discussing this. We can't forget about it. We can't look the other way, as tragic as it is. And so, I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying